The Italian army in Russia, known as the Italian Eighth Army, was formed in July of 1942 when Italian dictator Benito Spaghetti Mussolini decided to scale up the Italian efforts into the Soviet Union. The existing Italian Expeditionary Corps in Russia would be expanded. However, unlike the Mobile Expeditionary Corps which it replaced, the Eighth Army was primarily an infantry army, but with armored air defense, anti-tank, and field artillery capabilities. A good portion of the Eighth Army was also made up of mountain Alpini troops, which were ill-suited to the vast, flat expanses of southern Russia. 7 new divisions were sent into the Eastern Front, including 4 infantry divisions, which were the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 156th Vicenza infantry divisions. In addition to the infantry divisions, 3 Alpine divisions made up of Alpini specialized mountain troops were sent in, being the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Alpine divisions. These divisions were added to the existing 3 divisions of the Italian Expeditionary Corps in Russia, which was folded into the 8th Army to have a total of 10 divisions. By November of 1942, the 8th Italian Army had a total of 235,000 men in 12 divisions, including a Croatian volunteer legion under Italian command and 3 legions of Camici Nere, which were paramilitary black-shirt fascist volunteers. It was equipped with over 2,000 light and over 1,700 heavy machine guns, 250 light and 600 heavy artillery pieces, 52 anti-aircraft guns, 874 light mortars, and 423 heavy mortars, with 278 Italian 47/32 and 54 German 7.5 centimeter pack anti-tank guns. There were also 25,000 pack animals, 16,700 vehicles, and 4,770 motorcycles. But due to Italy's heavy commitments in North Africa, the armored component of the 8th Army was quite small. The armored Bersaglieri battalion included 2 companies of L6/40 light tanks, numbering about 60. The self-propelled anti-tank group had 2 squadrons of 19 assault guns. For anti-tank defenses, the Italians had been allocated 278 guns. Both the light tanks and the 47mm anti-tank guns, however, were outdated when compared to what the Soviets had. And as far as heavy artillery was concerned, the 8th Army would receive preferential treatment over the Italian forces in North Africa. Italian General Italo Garibaldi took command of the newly formed 8th Army instead of General Giovanni Messe, who had been leading the Italian Expeditionary Corps. And as commander of the Corps, Messe had opposed an enlargement of the Italian contingent in Russia until it could be properly equipped, and there was little winter gear as well. Rather than a numerically superior force of Italian troops in the Soviet Union, Messe had asked for a rise in heavy artillery support and motor vehicles, tanks, and anti-tank weapons, because he possessed a working brain. As a result, however, he was overruled by Benito's idiocy, and the Corps was expanded to the 8th Army without his further input. Because, why would a politician listen to a guy who knows what he's talking about? Anyway, as part of Case Blue, which was the 1942 summer offensive in southern Russia, the Italians moved forward to the Don River, pursuing the withdrawing Soviet 63rd Army. Bersaglieri were diverted to help the Germans eliminate the Soviet bridgeheads on the Don River. From July 30th to August 13th, the Italians fought off a heavy Soviet attack, took the town, swept into the woods and swamps around it, and fought off infiltrators as well as counterattacks, destroying the Soviet armored brigades, knocking out 35 tanks and taking 1,600 prisoners. The Italian battery proved to be very effective at short ranges and destroyed 12 tanks. The battle ended up costing the division 2,989 dead and wounded, and the division would be withdrawn from the front lines to rest and regroup, while they would have to defend a 270-kilometer front. The Soviets would then start attacking various German and Italian units on August 20th. On the 22nd, Messe's corps received reinforcements in the form of the 3rd Cavalry Division, the Chervino Mountain Battalion, and the remnants of the German 129th Infantry Regiment. Messe decided to counterattack, choosing his directions of attack and concentrating in those places with all of his forces available to him. These counterattacks began pretty favorably, and important positions would be retaken. Additionally, his counterattack included the cavalry charge of Izbushensky, where Italian horses conducted one of the last successful cavalry charges in history against the Soviets. These counterattacks executed by the Italians forced the Soviets to halt operations, but when they received reinforcements, they of course resumed, continuing until September 26th, where the weather conditions allowed for the interventions of Italian and German air forces, which dropped large-caliber bombs in the midst of the Soviet concentrations, forcing the Soviets to once again halt their operations. Now at this point, the Italians should have had 3 divisions and a German armored division in reserve, but the Soviet counteroffensives against the German forces in Stalingrad and the Caucasus had required that the reserve units be allocated elsewhere. Furthermore, there were no anti-tank weapons or anti-aircraft weapons needed for resisting any enemy actions, as the Germans were reallocating resources to better fit their forces and needs. Garibaldi had objected to this situation, but was commanded from Rome to bow to all the dispositions made by the German High Command. This, of course, had been agreed on by the two allies, being Angry Mustache Model and Benito Spaghetti. Messe would write that it was necessary for him to refuse to accept any missions which endangered the very existence of the entire Italian 8th Army. On December 11, 1942, the Soviet 63rd Army, backed by T-34 tanks and fighter bombers, first attacked the weakest Italian sectors in Operation Little Saturn. This sector was held on the right flank by 2 divisions. However, the Soviets had 15 divisions, supported by at least 100 tanks, and attacked the Italians. Although they were outnumbered 9-1, the Italians would resist until December 19th, when the 8th Army headquarters finally ordered the battered divisions to withdraw during the HQ's encirclement. Only before Christmas would both divisions be driven back and defeated, after of course heavy bloody fighting. On January 14, 1943, after a brief pause, the 6th Soviet Army attacked the divisions of the Alpine Corps as part of the Ostrogorsk-Rossosh offensive. These units had been placed on the left flank of the Italian army and were still relatively unaffected by the battle. However, the Alpini's position had turned critical after the collapse of the Italian center and their right flank, and the simultaneous collapse of the Hungarian troops to the left. On the 26th of January, the Alpini remnants breached the encirclement and reached new defensive positions set up to the west of the German army. Many of the Italian troops who managed to escape were frostbitten, critically ill, and deeply demoralized. For all practical purposes, the Italian army in Russia did not exist anymore by February of 1943. And that is the brief story of the Italian army in Russia from 1942 to 43. Of course, there will be a video much later on about what happened to the Italian POWs on the Eastern Front. But did you know about the 8th Army before this video? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.